Point two. What happens when we forsake God for things? A biblical description. What happens when we forsake God for things? A biblical description. In the biblical narrative, we see mankind as spiritual beings, always replacing love, commitment, service, devotion, and loyalty to God with love, commitment, service, and loyalty towards material things, selfish goals, self-worship, and lifeless possessions. The Bible says in Revelations 12, 4 through 9, Isaiah 14, 12 through 15, and Jude 1 and 6, that war broke out in heaven. Michael the archangel fought against the dragon and his angels, that old serpent who is called the devil, and the devil and his angels prevailed not. And Jesus says that I saw Satan as lightning fall from heaven down to earth. Satan and his rebellious angels were kicked out of heaven. Why? Disloyalty. Why did they forfeit their heavenly home for the pits of hell? Divided loyalty. Why did Satan choose his will instead of God's will? Why do we choose our wills over God's will? Divided loyalty. You cannot serve God and serve yourself as God. You cannot serve and adhere to two masters. The Bible declares in the book of Genesis chapter 3 that Adam and Eve, who were once fully committed to God, decided to follow the devil's advice and forsake God and his decrees. Little did they know that when they and we break and disobey God's commandments, when we are disloyal to God, when we replace our loyalty to God for self-pleasure, self-accomplishment, and disobedience, we, like Adam and Eve, will face terrible, terrible consequences. One, divine separation, Genesis 3, 23 through 24. Two, rejection from purpose, Genesis 2 and 22. 3, divine wrath, pain, and humility, Genesis 3 and 16. And 4, physical and spiritual death, Genesis 3, 17 through 19. Adam and Eve were disloyal to God through disobedience and self-gratification. As a result, all mankind were thrust upon a painful sword of sickness, degradation, rejection, and death. Adam and Eve, who were once God's divine representatives on the earth, allowed outside influences, satanic overtones, and divided loyalty to disconnect them from the divine life, separate them from divine consciousness, and detach them from their Creator. You cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve two masters. The Bible says in Genesis 6 and 7 that Jehovah saw the wickedness of man, and that it was great upon the earth, and every imagination of his thoughts and of his heart were evil continually. And Jehovah repented that he made man, and it grieved him to his heart. And Jehovah said that I will destroy the man whom I have made. And it states in Genesis 7 and 21 that God destroyed every living thing that moved upon the face of the earth. Why? Divided loyalty. You cannot serve two masters. When God destroyed the earth the first time with a flood, there was a man named Noah who was fully loyal to God. Only him and his family were saved. What about you? Are you fully loyal to God? Genesis 19 and 24 declares that Jehovah rained fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah. Why? Sexual immorality, lewdness, homosexuality, and divided loyalty. Sounds like America, doesn't it? The book of Exodus speaks of how God destroyed Egypt with a mighty outstretched hand. Why? Idolatry, mistreatment of God's people, and divided loyalty. The Bible says in 2 Samuel chapter 11 that King David chose the loyalty over Bathsheba over the loyalty of God. As a result, he lied. He committed adultery. He committed murder. A baby died and a nation was divided. Why? Divided loyalty. You cannot serve two masters. The Bible says in 1 Kings chapter 11, 1 through 9 that King Solomon, like his father, chose the loyalty of women and concubines over the loyalty of God. As a result, Solomon's loyalty toward these women, who were heathen women, turned his heart away from the God of his fathers. As a result, he fell into idolatry. The nation was divided and chaos broke out throughout the land. Remember, you cannot serve two masters. The Bible says in Joshua chapter 7 that a man named Achan chose material items over his loyalty to God and the Jewish nation. The results, it says that they took Achan, his family, his belongings, all of his herds, and they stoned him with stones and burned him with fire. Why? Divided loyalty. You cannot serve two masters. In Genesis 19 and 26, we read of how Lot's wife couldn't resist the allure of riches, wealth, and the fast-paced life of Sodom and Gomorrah. Instead of her moving forward and escaping destruction, her loyalty crippled her. She looked back on how it used to be instead of moving forward on what God said it would be. What about you? What are you loyal to? Are you loyal to God? Or are you loyal to yourself? What are you loyal to? Are you loyal to the bingo house? Or are you loyal to the house of God? The Bible says in Exodus chapter 32 that the children of Israel chose to worship and serve a lifeless calf of gold, instead of worshiping and serving the God that brought them out of Egypt with a mighty outstretched hand. The Bible says the results of this is that more than 3,000 died that day. Divided loyalty. From the sons of Eli, dying because they were disloyal to God's commands. From Samson, choosing the loyalty of a prostitute over the loyalty of God and dying between two pillars. From Ananias and Sapphira, choosing the loyalty of lies and the money and dying at the apostles' feet. From Judas, choosing disloyalty for 30 pieces of silver and hanging himself until his bowels burst under. What about you? What about me? All throughout the biblical narrative, we see one theme time and time again: self-worship, self-grandeur, and divided loyalty.